Okay, do you see, Maggie, does it look like I should be starting?
It looks normal.
All right.
Good to go.
Okay. Good Friday morning, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of the UEC's Backyard Naturalist, where we take a closer look at the extraordinary wildlife, plants, and systems that are in and around our backyards. My name is Tim, and today we are looking at the woolly bear caterpillar. And we humans have given the name woolly bear, or sometimes woolly worm, or sometimes banded woolly worm, or some combination of those words to many, many different species of caterpillars, because there's a lot of little fuzzy caterpillars out there. And so there's actually hundreds of different species of moths that have woolly bear or woolly worm caterpillars. And we're going to take a close look at the one that we see most often here, at least in Wisconsin. But if you're like me, when you see a woolly bear caterpillar cross your path, which we're going to start seeing soon, I know I'm supposed to look at the size of the color bands because I know that that's supposed to predict what the weather will be like in the coming winter. But if you're also like me, when you see that, you say, okay, this one has wider bands, which means it's a harsher winter or a milder winter, one of the two. In other words, I have no idea, but hopefully in the next half hour, we'll all have a better idea of the weather predicting powers of woolly bears, and maybe we'll all teach each other a few more things along the way. The Backyard Naturalist is part of the UEC in my backyard. A huge thank you to subscribers who keep this program sustainable, and also a thank you to members of the Urban Ecology Center. Membership at the UEC gets you a discounted subscription rate to this program. And for the month of August, our friends at Third Space Brewing are offering buy one, get one drinks on Mondays and Tuesdays for UEC members. So Third Space has a great indoor and outdoor space in the Menominee Valley and delicious beers and root beers to enjoy. Plus, they're located just a couple blocks off of the Hank Aaron State Trail. So it would be super fun to bike, walk, roll, or roller skate there to enjoy some refreshment with your friends and family. For more details, visit the UEC website or contact membership manager Glenna Holstein. And finally, I'm humbled and honored to report that the fine folks at McGillis Weimer Attorneys at Law have once again sponsored the UEC in my backyard for the month of August. Graham Weimer is a good friend of mine, and they are local attorneys with over 50 years legal experience that handle personal injury, family law, estate planning, and more. They are expert litigation attorneys in Milwaukee. Let them protect you. I'm also really excited for next week's talk, hosted by returning host Dan Goldman, who gave just a fabulous talk a few weeks ago on bats. And he's returning to talk a little more about the sobering crisis facing bats in North America, the white nose syndrome, and what we can do to help. And the following week, we are super lucky to be joined by Haley Marzoff, who is doing some just fabulous, ahead of our times, state-of-the-art work on conservation in urban habitats, and specifically the UEC green spaces. And she's going to give us a summary of the important work that she's doing, specifically urban prairie conservation. And she's just a delightful speaker, so I encourage you to tune in. And then we're going to kick off season 3 of the Backyard Naturalist. We're committed to another season. And in September, we're going to start with a look at the common nighthawk. It's not common, it's not nocturnal, and it's not a hawk, yet we call it the common nighthawk. And this will be part also of the fall backyard birding blitz. So stay tuned to see how you can get involved and contact anyone on the UEC's research team for details. Okay, on with the show. The woolly bear caterpillar. As a field biologist, if you were to ask me what's the first thing I notice about woolly bears, I would say that their preferred habitat seems to be sidewalks, because I'm pretty sure that's the only place I've ever seen them. Crossing the sidewalk, crossing a path, or crossing the road. And because their larval form that you see here is so different from the adult form, as is the case with many insects, I didn't even know what they turned into before looking into this episode. So it was like the spittlebug. Uh, and for some reason, I'm only familiar with the woolly bear in its caterpillar form. If you've seen woolly bears anywhere apart from a concrete path, take a picture, let me know, please. But for now, I'm going to say that concrete paths are their preferred habitat. At the beginning of season 2, we had an episode on the monarch butterfly, and we looked a bit at the phenology of butterflies and moths. And we learned that butterflies are actually a fairly recent offshoot of the moth branch. So it's somewhat accurate to say that butterflies and skippers are types of moths, but they all belong to the order Lepidoptera, which means scaly wing. And they're eukaryotic animals belonging to the insect wing, pun intended, of the arthropods. In that episode, we talk about the differences between butterflies and moth, but I'll just give you a very quick review. Butterflies tend to be more colorful. They tend to be active during the day. Their pupal form is protected by a chrysalis. They tend to have long, thin bodies and antennae that are also long and thin. And sometimes they have little clubs on the end of the antennae. Their front and hind wings are not attached to each other. And at rest, they tend to hold their wings closed and upright. Moths, on the other hand, tend to be duller in color. They're more active at night, and their pupal form is what we call a cocoon. They have thick bodies and short feathery antennae, and when they rest, their connected wings tend to lay open and flat. These are all generalizations, and they're always exceptions to the rule. And in the Monarch NATO episode, we really go in more into the reasons why or behind these differences. So for example, butterflies, because they fly during the day, they tend to be more visual, which leads to more colorful bodies as a means of communication, both with other butterflies and potential predators. And it's also harder to sneak up on butterflies because they're more visual. It's easier to sneak up on a moth. And moths, on the other hand, at night, it's hard for them to see things, so they don't rely on vision as much. They rely much more on chemical communication. And they can detect pheromones at extremely low concentrations to communicate with each other. And that's what those feathered antennae are doing. They're kind of like little rabbit ears. They're able to detect these tiny, tiny chemicals in the air. As I mentioned, there are many, many different species of moths whose caterpillars that we call woolly bears. We'll visit a few of them, but we're going to start with the species that I think most of us in North America call the woolly bear caterpillar. And that's this lovely larval stage of what will become the Isabella Tiger Moth. And this picture is good at pointing out a few things on Lepidoptera larvae in general. First of all, we know that they're insects, but we also know that insects only have 6 legs. So what's going on here? It says way more than 6 legs. The front 3 pairs of legs are the actual legs. So a caterpillar really does only have 6 legs. The true legs are those first 3 pairs. And then all of the ones behind it are called proto-legs. So they're not actual legs. And then when it does its magic and becomes a butterfly, it's those first 3 legs that will eventually morph into the adult insect legs. And for all intents and purposes, those back legs still function as legs. So it can actually move. And so a caterpillar does have 6 legs and a whole bunch of proto-legs. The other thing you'll notice in this picture is just how hairy this caterpillar is. And that's another general distinction with some exceptions, but moth caterpillars tend to be hairier and butterfly caterpillars tend to be smoother, but that's a big generalization. So not all caterpillars are hairy, but often these little hairs offer additional protection to the caterpillar from a predator or from a curious scientist poking at it, because oftentimes the hairs are urticating. And urticating simply means that they cause a stinging or irritating sensation if you touch them. The word urtica comes from nettle, and the plant stinging nettle, who also has urticating hairs, along with some spiders and tarantulas. So sometimes the hairs of caterpillars are urticating. Sometimes they actually inject venom into you and can be quite painful. So this cute and cuddly looking, it's called a puss caterpillar. wouldn't seem so cuddly if you happen to brush up against it. So people that have been stung, because this does have venom, people that have been stung by the puss caterpillar have said that the pain felt like a white hot burn. They compared it to blunt trauma or breaking a bone. So very, very painful. And usually that pain is localized, but it can become systemic. It can go through the rest of your body, leading to potentially much bigger problems depending on how you react. So sometimes caterpillar venoms are mixed with other chemicals that make them even more deadly, like anticoagulants. So there are some caterpillars that if you pet them, it could be the last thing you do. So my rule is if it's hairy or spiky, just admire it from a distance and don't take the risk of touching it. Also works for me for not eating any mushrooms, and except for the ones I find in the grocery store, and not touching any snakes in the tropics.
Hey, Tim.
Yes.
Do we have this caterpillar here?
I think this caterpillar is more on the East Coast. It is in the US. I don't know if it reaches into Wisconsin, but I will find that information out, or if somebody has a Google. It's called the puss caterpillar. It can help me out, but we'll look into that. Good question. Because it would be good to know about it if we are having another moth party. All right. Woolly bears are in a group of moths called the Noctuid moths. And Noctuid is Latin for night owl, so it's more fun to call them the Owlet moths. And this is the largest superfamily of lepidopterans, of butterflies, skippers, and moths, with over 70,000 described species, like this large yellow underwing. And that is its actual name. It's a large yellow underwing, and I'm not just describing it. And when it lifts its wings out, like many underwings, there's yellow under there. The Isabella Tiger Moth, or a woolly bear, further belongs to a family Erybidae, which is also the largest family of lepidopterans, and also includes some of the largest moths in body size in the world. So this black witch moth on the upper right has a 5-inch wingspan. And the striking moth on the left is called Eulipididis affinis. And this family includes the underwings, includes moths with great names like litter moths, tiger moths, lichen moths, wasp moths, tussock moths, piercing moths, micronoctuid moths, snout moths. This is a tongue twister. Owlets and zales. One of these things is not like the other. This group has also some of the smallest moths in the world. Some of the micronoctuid moths, I mean, some of the moths that we saw last night were pretty darn small. Some of the micronoctuid moths have a wingspan of 1/4 inch. So with their wings spread open, you could line up 4 of them across the face of a quarter. That's how small they are. And yet somehow they still are able to fly. And this group in general includes some of the most colorful and camouflaged moths, and they can be found in all continents except Antarctica, which is a very common pattern. Now we're going to go down to subfamily. And normally I don't focus on all these groupings within the groupings, but the subfamily Arctiinae is important because the larval form of almost all of the caterpillars that we call woolly bears reside in this subfamily. It's 11,000 species and includes the striking tiger moths, sometimes just called tigers, footmen, like this beautiful speckled footman, lichen moths, which are some of the best camouflaged moths. If you want to spend some time looking at some really well camouflaged moths, look up the lichen moths, because depending on their local lichen, they can just super blend in. And then this is a wasp moth. Yes, that is a moth, not a wasp. And the dead giveaway is those very feathery antennae up front. Many members of this family are either poisonous or venomous or distasteful. And usually because of what they ingest themselves. And then they ingest things that are poisonous to things that would eat them. And so they warn away predators by being really colorful and saying, I'm here, don't eat me, except for in the case of the lichen moths. Or like the wasp moth, they mimic a species that is pretty harmful hopefully deterring predators from trying to eat it. This brings us to the genus and species of our cute, cuddly, woolly bear, Pyrarctia Isabella, or the Isabella tiger moth. And this picture is proof that they are found in other habitats besides concrete. There are actually only 2 named species in this genus. In addition to the Isabella tiger moth, there's a very, very poorly known and poorly studied species. Maybe somebody listening on this call would be interested in studying them as a career, but there's a Pyrarctia janini from Mexico that we know very, very little about. And that's the only other member of this genus. And despite what I said earlier about the dangerous properties of many caterpillar hairs, the woolly bear, you can fear not, because the hairs are neither urticating nor do they inject any type of venom. So technically they are safe to pick up, but maybe you should fear a little because some people do react to touching the hairs of the woolly bear caterpillars, which may result in a mild form of dermatitis. So maybe best for your sake and for the woolly bear to leave it alone, unless it's on the sidewalk and you see bikes coming, then you maybe want to shoo it off so they don't get flattened. If disturbed or attacked, it will defend itself by rolling into an adorable little Muppet ball, and it will remain motionless, playing possum, and then quickly crawling away if it perceives the threat has lessened or gone away. So this ball rolling habit has also earned woolly bears the name of hedgehog caterpillars. The Isabella tiger moth can be found in very, very cold places, much colder places than most lepidopterans. So in places with harsh winters like Wisconsin, they can even get it up into the Arctic Circle. And they do that by actually letting their bodies succumb to the winter and letting their bodies freeze solid. So the eggs hatch, the second generation hatches in late summer. The caterpillars spend the fall eating and growing and crossing the paths. And then they remain in that caterpillar form throughout the winter. So some moths will be in their cocoons during the winter. This one is in its caterpillar form during the winter. They find a nice secure place to hunker down. And when it's time, their heart stops beating, their gut freezes solid, then the blood, and then the rest of the body. And it has a cryoprotectant antifreeze in its tissues that keep the cells from being destroyed until the spring thaw. In fact, one caterpillar a scientist was studying made it through the winter in an ice cube. And another quick fun fact, this hibernation process is likely why they're called woolly bears, because bears are also known for their hibernation. So with that, we're going to take a look at a very short video about not our woolly bear, but a cousin to the woolly bear, the Arctic woolly bear, which is actually a type of tussock moth, but we can see their amazing abilities to overwinter.
It's the start of summer, and these Arctic woolly bear caterpillars are in a race against time. They feast while they can, making the most of long summer days. Their goal is to reach an optimum weight to enable them to pupate into a moth, completing their life cycle. But this far north, summer is brief. Soon, the days begin to shorten. Winter is coming. This woolly bear has not managed to eat enough to transform into a moth. Time has run out. As temperatures plummet, it settles under a rock to await its fate. Still alive, its body starts to freeze. Its heart stops beating. Blood turned to ice. The depths of winter. For 5 months, temperatures won't rise above -30. Spring, and the thaw begins. The caterpillar miraculously rises from the dead and begins to feed. But no matter how fast the woolly bears eat, they won't be able to pupate this year either. The cold closes in once again. The years pass, the seasons come and go, and still the caterpillars feed while they can, before being wrapped again in an icy embrace. By breaking down their cell components and flooding their bodies with antifreeze chemicals, amazingly, the caterpillars can survive, withstanding temperatures as low as -70 degrees centigrade. Eventually, a very special summer arrives, as this will be its last. Only now has it eaten enough to make the transformation into an adult. It's 7 years old, the world's oldest caterpillar. Days later, the adult moth emerges. It must now find a partner and mate. The woolly bears can only complete their life cycle because of their incredible adaptation. It's their extraordinary solution to living in such a hostile and marginal habitat.
So another thing about those hairs, which are often for defense, is that a lot of the northern species of moths do have those hair. They do have properties of trapping heat, just like you'd have fur on any other animal, a mammal that would be farther north. And it also, so it helps keep them warmer, but it also helps with that freezing process. And it's kind of integral to making it happen in the order that it needs to happen to keep the caterpillar alive. So the larval tiger moth, the larval woolly bear moth has 13 segments, and they're each kind of those like pancake shaped discs. There's 13 of them, and they're characterized by having black on each end, and then the middle segment has that kind of brown with a reddish tint. And those are the most important clues for this question that we all want to know. How do they predict the weather? So here is all you need to know about woolly bears and the weather. This doesn't rhyme or anything, but if the brown band in the middle is wide, then we're in for a mild winter. And if the brown band is narrow, it's time to stock up the pantry because winter is going to be severe. But if you see a woolly bear and you don't like its prediction, another predictor is the color or the darkness of those stripes. Some even are black all the way across. So if that also has weather predicting powers, and if you still don't have the forecast that you want, you can look at the direction that the caterpillar is crawling. Because if it's crawling north towards the winter, then the winter will be mild because they're going to embrace it. But if it's heading south, it's trying to escape the winter, and the winter will be severe. And if that still doesn't work for you, just wait for the next caterpillar to come by, and maybe it'll give you the forecast that you want. And if you don't believe the woolly bear and you're still not convinced, you should just talk to another animal that we've randomly assigned to predicting the weather for us. If you are a believer and you want the story to end here, don't go away, but you may want to turn down the volume for the next slide because it's going to be covered in a wet blanket. The alternative theory to the stripes in the woolly bear is that there is just much variation in the size of both the brown middle patches and the black patches between individuals. Even if they're siblings from the same clutch, you're going to have different patterns of brown and black. So also, the middle brown area tends to lengthen as the caterpillar goes through its instars. So if you see a caterpillar that just hatched, it could be a severe winter because the brown patch will be narrower. But if you see a caterpillar that's more grown up, it could be a mild winter because the brown patch will be wider. So best to just ignore those early woolly bears. Don't totally ignore them because they're on the sidewalks and you might step on them. But pay attention to the later woolly bears if you're interested in convincing yourself that the winter will be mild. And if, of course, a mild winter is your thing. If you love severe winters, look for woolly bears earlier in the season. And if that's not enough, some scientists have found out that some woolly bears will actually, that brown section will actually decrease as they get older. So it's just as clear as mud and how this works. But if anything, this slide proves my point that woolly bear caterpillars only hang out on concrete or wood. And so far, we've only been looking at the larval form of the woolly bear. So what does the adult form look like? And here is the big reveal, the adult
Hey, Tim.
woolly bear. Yes.
We have a question in the chat. Do they usually take years to grow?
No, there have been cases where a woolly bear won't pupate and become an adult when it's supposed to. It might wait a season in at least for as far as I know, as farther north. But unlike the Arctic woolly bear that will go many years, at least in our climates, they actually undergo the cycle twice a year. So like everything in biology, there's probably exceptions to the rule. But for the most part, if you're at least studying the Wisconsin woolly bears, they do this twice a year. So here it is, the adult Isabella Tiger Moth, splendid. I just think it's really beautiful with that golden mane and the sparse speckles of dark on the wing. And if this doesn't enrapture you, the adult version of the woolly bear, just wait until you take a look under its forewings. And here's where the oohs are replaced with the ahs, because you see that subtly striking shade of salmon in the hind wings. And this pattern isn't surprising, given that they're related to the underwings. Kind of, I think my new favorite moths are these underwings, where the wings underneath just reveal a different color. But I'm not sure. I don't know if I've ever seen an adult woolly bear. They're flying around at night with most of the moths, or I should say an adult Isabella Tiger Moth. And even if I did, I'm not convinced I'd be able to identify it yet. But come next spring and with more moth parties, I'm going to start looking for these adult Isabella Tiger Moths. So woolly bears have crawled their way into the hearts of many communities in the US. And there are several festivals that are held each fall as the woolly bears are crawling around on the ground. In fact, I was pretty shocked that there's so many festivals, and I wasn't aware of them until a couple days ago. So the first known woolly bear festival started in Vermilion, Ohio, which is the state that also hosts the buzzard or turkey vulture festival that we just learned about from Corey Zetz. I'm not sure what it is about Ohio and animal festivals, But apparently the Woolly Bear Festival is the largest single-day festival in the entire state of Ohio, attracting in the before times 100,000 visitors in one day for just an all-out Woolly Bear Palooza. There are Woolly Bear costume contests and Woolly Bear races. The fire and police chiefs and mayor all get involved in vaudeville-like plays. There's festival royalty. Here we see the Woolly Bear King and Queen, and of course the goat. This almost makes me want to move to Vermilion, Ohio. And of course, people will turn their pets into Woolly Bears. But it's not just Vermilion, Ohio that drank the Woolly Bear nectar. There are big Woolly Bear festivals in Banner Elk, North Carolina, with a Woolly Bear race where the winner is the one that predicts the winter severity. Beattyville, Kentucky hosts the Woolly Worm Festival with people racing Woolly Bears up strings. Oil City, Pennsylvania hosts the Woolly Bear Jamboree, and Little Valley, New York hosts the Wilma Woolly Bear Weekend, combining with the arts, and Wilma stands for We Invite Local Manufacturers and Artisans. So totally unbeknownst to me, Woolly Bears are a big deal across the country if you know where to look. The Isabella Tiger Moth, again, is not the only moth whose caterpillars are called Woolly Bears. There are many, many, many. But like the Arctic Woolly Bear we saw, the larvae of the beautiful Grammea incorrupta, whose Woolly Bear caterpillars actually ingest an alkaloid-laden leaf. And what that does is it helps it fight off an internal parasitic fly larvae that's quite prevalent in its area. So this is the first clear demonstration of self-medication among insects. And the garden tiger moth also has caterpillars called woolly bears, and they also ingest alkaloids, although in this case, it's probably more to make themselves unpalatable to the predators. And here you see another excellent example of that underwing pattern. When it's up against the bark, it's fairly well camouflaged, but when it opens its wings, you see that beautiful yellow and blue pattern. So here's a very quick review of the life cycle of the Isabella tiger moth. And as I mentioned, local populations here usually go through 2 generations in a year. So the ones that we find crawling around in the fall are the ones that are going to hunker down over the winter. And then when they thaw in the early spring, they'll pupate, become adult tiger moths that drink nectar. They go from having chewing mouth parts to sucking mouth parts. They go from eating plants to sucking nectar. And then the females will lay eggs that hatch into the spring woolly bears that have much shorter lifespans. They turn into adults, lay eggs in the summer, and then those eggs produce the fall woolly bears that will hibernate through the winter. So we'll cut to a quick Science Friday video that's an excellent way to wrap up our look into woolly bears.
On your mark, get set, go!
Every year since 1978, the residents of Banner Elk, North Carolina, race woolly bear caterpillars. Like the infamous groundhog of Punxsutawney, Pennsylvania, the winning animal is deemed a prognosticator of the coming winter weather. You may have heard this myth.
The woolly bear caterpillar body has 13 segments, and you can actually count the segments. The more brown on the woolly bear, the milder the coming winter.
And the more black segments, the harsher it will be. So how did the larva of a moth become a pop culture prophet? And if animals can detect earthquakes or rainstorms, could there be any truth to the myth?
We are at Bear Mountain State Park in the lower Hudson Valley, about 40 miles north of New York City. We do see woolly bears. Especially this time of year, you see them trying to find their winter retreats. They generally want to get underneath something to spend the winter. It could be a piece of wood, a log, a rock. They actually have an adaptation where they have cryoprotectants circulating in their body that keep them from fully freezing, and it protects their tissues from damage when it gets below zero. We have miles and miles of roads that pass through the extensive park system, and that's a good place to encounter woolly bears.
It was on the roads of Bear Mountain on a warm fall day in 1948 that Dr. Howard Coran, the curator of entomology at the American Museum of Natural History, along with his colleagues, conducted the first informal study of the woolly bear's predictive powers. A reporter at the New York Herald Tribune accompanied the group, noting that they gathered 15 fine woolly bears. And even though they were out for woolly bears, the scientists decided it was safe to take their wives along. The story took off and garnered national attention.
And he carried it on for about 8 years, from the late 40s into the early 50s. And I think he designed it really just to have a pleasant foray up to Bear Mountain each fall.
There's just one problem.
Intuitively, I would find it difficult to believe.
Dr. Jack Lane of Slippery Rock University researches woolly bears and other freeze-tolerant creatures.
You see a lot of variability among individuals, even in the same year. I would expect to be collecting maybe 100 or more from an individual population in order to try to get a feel for what the band dynamics are. And then, of course, you want to look across a number of neighboring geographic areas. You really need to collect a large amount of data over many, many different years.
So if Dr. Curran's study isn't valid, then where does that leave the myth?
You know, I haven't seen evidence to disprove the woolly bear hypothesis, but honestly, that science is out on that one.
But wait, before you label science a buzzkill, here's a few reasons to love the woolly bear's fuzz.
They're brown and black, and that's usually a warning to potential predators that I'm not very good to eat. And then you get a mouthful of hairs if you do try to eat them.
These hairs, or CT, don't keep the caterpillar warm like fur. They actually help to freeze it.
It turns out the bristles trigger freezing of water temperatures that are just a little bit below 0 degrees centigrade. The advantage here is it allows the caterpillar to freeze more predictably.
And that's a prediction the woolly bear can actually use. You see, recent studies have shown that each time the woolly bear has to thaw and freeze, there are energy costs to repair damaged cells and reboot their systems. These specialized CT allow the woolly bear to begin the freezing process outside of its body, away from its cells, and then hopefully stay in a frozen state longer. So the bristles and bands of the woolly bear protect it from predators and help to control its cryogenic slumber. But Dr. Lane suggests there may be one more plausible benefit to the bristles and bands.
So they're probably a little bit more tolerated simply because people find them sort of a cute and quaint animal. So the legend just adds a little bit more to their affection for the caterpillars.
Now that's a charming survival strategy. For Science Friday, I'm Luke Groskin.
All right, so there you have it. I'm excited to start seeing the winter generation of woolly bear caterpillars crawling around soon, particularly because I really want to know what this winter is going to be like. And I'm more excited to someday attend a woolly bear festival. Maybe Corey can organize a whirlwind trip of Ohio animal festivals for the Urban Ecology Center. And I'm even more excited to start looking for the adult Isabella tiger moths. But I do think it's entirely possible I will go through my whole life with only knowing the woolly bear and not the Isabella tiger moth. And if that happens, I'm good with that too. So thank you for joining me today, and we'll see you next week. I will stop sharing my screen, and which is good for me because then I get to see your faces again.